So yeah, welcome everybody to this group. So we're going to be discussing financial services. So yeah, as we said, about 10, maximum, hopefully 15 minutes for a presentation with more detailed findings. And then we will ask you to come in and provide your thoughts, your recommendations, your feedback, your ideas. So we'll be very much looking forward to that discussion. So I'm going to presenting jointly with Hatem, who's also here. Maybe Hatem, do you want to quickly introduce yourself as well?
Hello, everybody. My name is Hatem. I'm still as a research consultant with the FIND project, and I'm looking forward for a very interesting discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Hatem. So basically, I'm going to run to the slides. You can, in the meantime, if you have thoughts, ideas, you can always put them in the chat. Sorry, Hatem.
Sorry. Hello. Yeah, my mom.
Okay, I think you were not muted. Yes, so you can always feel free to put any questions in the chat, any thoughts in the chat, and then we will get to the discussion afterwards. But even if we don't get to all the points that are raised in the chat, we are saving the chat as well, so that we can keep all of your thoughts to feed into our final report, into our final recommendations. So very much welcome active engagement on all fronts. Great, so just before we turn to the specific financial services, let's go back a little bit to understand how refugees are currently fulfilling their financial priorities. So as Swati already presented, there are basically 5 tasks that they want to perform to ensure financial health. So the 5 tasks you see here on the slide with Swati also already presented. So mainly they do this with lumpy and volatile income. They don't have stable income. There is informal debt and informal loans they're using from networks, from family, from friends. This is for meeting their daily needs as well as for more productive investments. And one thing that's been really used often is the sort of store credits, so from neighborhood grocery shops that have actually played an important role in supporting refugees' daily needs. But also one-off assistance or humanitarian assistance, such as winterization assistance, is what they often rely on. So we see that most participants are actually consumed by the stress of this daily financial management and lack the bandwidth and perspective to expand their financial planning horizon. Please also let me know if I'm audible, because I had flagged that I was a bit silent, so just flag if you didn't hear anything. So then this slide was also already presented by Swati. So with the main finding, we see that financial services, or the demand for financial services from refugees, actually co-evolves along with the progression in their livelihood. Whereas we see that, especially in the first phases, refugees continue mostly to rely on informal support and services. So for example, in the first years of the dependent stage, refugees mostly are in need of external support, humanitarian support, handouts, or even community reports and some remittances. Then when they move to the survivalihood phase, although we discussed that they could also go back and forth, it's not necessarily a linear progress. You know, maybe some started a small business here, but the focus is still mainly on cash flow smoothing, also managing setbacks, etc. And in all cases in this survivalihood space, people really still rely on informal lines of credit, for example, from, like I mentioned, from friends, from family, but also from landlord, as rent was really one of the biggest stressors as well for most refugees. A couple might use formal microcredits, and then only we saw in the case of the Iraqi refugees, they received regular remittances. So we see for the large majority, it's really still relying on these informal resources. And then only in the last phase, when income might become more stable, there might be some more formal financial services required, such as bank accounts to receive a salary or to start a business, or a formal credits to expand the business. But we actually see that most refugees most of our participants didn't actually get to that phase. So if refugees are not able to build their livelihoods up to that stage, the demand for these formal financial services is also flattening. So this was sort of on the demand side. So now if we move to the supply side, we can just give a quick overview here of the types of services available in Jordan. And we will go into a bit more depth into some of these. So I will have 2 slides on mobile wallets that have been, as Swati mentioned, kind of pushed as the key financial services for refugees in Jordan. And then I will hand over to Hatem, who will talk a bit more about savings and microcredits and bank accounts, I think. So in addition to mobile wallets, we see some informal saving groups, which are quite common among Jordanians. And we had some of our Syrian participants using these, but only the ones that are really able to commit to these fixed monthly contributions, as I think Swati was just explaining in her response to the question. So it's still challenging for some of the refugees to join these. There are also some experiments with digital saving groups that use a mobile app. Then on microcredit, there's only 2 microfinance institutions currently offering microcredit to Syrian refugees. And again, there are quite some challenges related to know your customers requirements. So they need refugees actually need a valid passport to access microcredit, which obviously restricts their access quite a bit. Then remittances, international or domestic remittances through using money exchange shop is quite common. And then finally, for formal bank accounts, we see again that the know your customer, the KYC issues the requirements are really steep. So they need to show a valid passport, a work permit, a proof of residence. And then even for a minority that could fulfill these requirements as refugees, not all of the banks are willing to open an account. So we see services differ across the banks, and some will open, but others will not actually open an account. So let's just move a little bit in more detail on the mobile wallet. So I think you might be aware, so the Central Bank of Jordan has recognized refugees as an important segment under its national financial inclusion strategy. And they've focused on the mobile wallets account as the solution for financial inclusion for refugees. So they allowed Syrian refugees to open an account with their Ministry of Interior card. However, this means refugees from other nationalities that don't have this card, they can't access, they still need a valid passport, and they remain excluded. So our recommendation here is to be accepting UNHCR refugee IDs instead of the Ministry of Interior card, so that refugees from all nationalities could actually access the wallet. So I'm not going to go into much detail, but as we see here in the graph, there was quite some uptake of transactions, number and value of transactions since sort of the start of the COVID pandemic. And this is mostly due to the government starting to move to using digital payments for some social security and salaries. So some social security payments and salaries during the pandemic, and also humanitarian organizations which have beginning to shift more to this using these mobile wallets. But actually, when we look at the usage for refugees, we see there the shift from just cashing out, using it as something to receive assistance, to next stages and other use cases. It's not automatic. And we saw participants were motivated to open a wallet to receive the assistance, but then afterwards they stopped using it or even closed the account again. So this digital financial inclusion is really the buzzword right now, but with the current use, it hasn't been yet transformative for refugees in Jordan, because again, they have, they really need solutions for their income challenges, rather than whether a payment is made in cash or digital. It's not their first concern. So what can we do now to improve this relevance for refugees on mobile wallets and digital solutions? So we see here on the slide a couple of things that can be improved to improve perceived usefulness and the trust in the services, which also remain an issue. So yeah, I'm not going to go through all of these. We see, for example, financial literacy is of course also important, but currently there's more these kind of standalone trainings happening in Jordan. And we think it would be much more useful if it was sort of these trainings for couples to services with use cases that are more relevant for refugees. So we have a couple of examples here of use cases that we were thinking of, and we will ask you during the discussion to help us think about these as well and give any feedback on them. So firstly, on international remittances, so it's quite important to digitize the income sources so that mobile wallets then can become useful as well. And so this is happening to a certain extent through the humanitarian transfers, but it's not sufficient. And so we know that, so international remittances, there's a pilot project for them to be digitized, supported by the GIZ and the DMZ, and as Linnea also mentioned in her opening speech, which is the Digitansis project, which could be an interesting example. And then a second potential solution could be digital fundraising. So we've actually seen from our participants that they started to do like some crowdfunding from their networks, from friends, from family, when there was, for example, a medical emergency. So such kind of things that people are already doing, it might be easy with a fintech solution to make it easier for them to do this kind of crowdfunding in a digital way. Then thirdly, we're really seeing an increase in these e-commerce platforms, gig economy, and other sort of online marketplaces, where we think the mobile wallets could really play a role in facilitating payments. And this is an interesting example of it's kind of creating an ecosystem that supports livelihoods, so like addresses the income problems of refugees, as well as just the financial service. So that's an interesting one. And then fourthly, we have some ideas on improving digital savings. And on the savings side, I will now hand over to Hatem to speak a bit more about that. So Hatem, over to you.
Well, thank you, Annelien. Just a quick note before I start. There's a lot of noise around me from the building, unfortunately. So let me know if you can hear me or not. Yeah.
It's perfectly fine for now.
Okay, great. So thank you, Annelien. And as my colleagues previously mentioned earlier, despite the financial hardship our research participant has faced, we did see that most of them actually kept aside small amounts of money. Like these amounts are quite small and mainly focused with our female participants in the research. And even though the refugees, or specifically our participants, didn't refer to these amounts as savings, and more like under the mattress kind of amounts, we did see that pattern of cycle of saving. Cycle of saving is something we define as the act of putting away money regularly for a specific purpose. Most of the amounts were taking place by using mainly informal instruments. So under the mattress, some participants bought small amounts of gold. Actually, we had one Sudanese participant who kept the money and saved the money with a money guard. All these instruments, we think, exposed refugees to high risks, as some participants did actually lost their savings. It was also common for people to assign savings to different mental accounts. So, for example, keeping a can where they keep some cash to save for rent or unplanned emergency. These amounts, just as a note, doesn't exceed, like the emergency amount doesn't exceed like 10 to 15 GREs. Next slide, please. So some suggested ideas to how we can use mobile wallets in a way that actually supports digital savings. Our first suggestion is automated saving contribution deducted from payment and that are received through the mobile wallet, like cash assistance or other income. Our next idea is digital savings group, which allow for flexible contributions and safety of deposits through institutional guarantees, and gives the refugees more flexibility logistically, and they can take part even when they are far in terms of location. Another could be a labeled mobile wallet with sub-accounts based on a specific saving goals to address the challenges of mental accounting. Such a product would combine behavioral prompts, such as setting a saving goal and then issuing scheduled reminders. In any of these cases and ideas, the products should be designed so they can help people save in a way that is, one, flexible and aligned to their incomes, liquid, so they would have access to to these amounts whenever it's needed, safe, and ensure their privacy, as privacy was really very highlighted by most of our research participants. The next financial service we look at is microcredit, which is generally seen as a very important financial service for refugees, especially for women, to support them to start small business activities. Among our participants, 5 Syrians had taken loans from a formal institution, and in all cases, these amounts were used for big medical emergency and not to initiate any small business activity. What we actually heard during the interviews is that microcredit also increased vulnerability, especially for women who do not have any income from work and mainly depending on cash assistance. They were not using the money to start any income generating activity that could help them to repay the loan, but mainly, as I mentioned before, to spend it on medical expenses. So what we suggest here is that microcredit, if promoted for refugee women, it should be done with caution. It further needs to be bundled with a livelihood support in a form of capacity building and job matching or mentoring to set up a small business. Our last recommendation is actually is to allow for refugees to access the mainstream services rather than locking them in financial services which are not mainstreamed in the financial infrastructure. So mainly allowing, or like as an example, allowing refugees to open a bank account using their UNHCR ID. And here, like bank accounts, we know they can differ in type, so we're here suggesting at least the basic form of bank accounts. For remittances, while Syrians can actually use the Ministry of Interior card at exchange houses, our non-Syrian participants expressed that they were unable to use this service as they don't have these types of cards, and they need to show a valid passport or and a work permit, which, as most of you know, they don't have. So allowing the UNHCR ID to be used for this would prevent informal use, where refugees actually borrow other people's IDs to receive or send remittances, or go and use underground informal channels. Just next slide, please. Just as a reminder at the end on what we define as financial health and the non-financial inputs needed to achieve this. First one is language, second is mental health, and third is networks and friendship. And in the end, the overall rights to access these economic opportunities. So now I get back to you, Annalene, to kick off the discussion, and happy to answer any question and happy to hear any comments also about our suggestions. Thank you.